The story begins with a group of adventurers exploring a dungeon. Some of them were injured after battling the monsters within. As they pressed on, one of the adventurers asked an injured companion if he was all right and urged him to hold on a little longer. However, the injured adventurer suddenly collapsed, unable to continue walking. Noticing this, another adventurer remarked on the situation, pointing out that yet another person had fallen. He then questioned how many others had already collapsed and expressed concern that the healers were running low on mana, leaving them unable to tend to the wounded. He warned that if things continued this way, their entire group would be doomed. At that tense moment, the injured adventurer managed a weak smile and reassured the group, reminding them that they still had the Empire's hope by their side, Warrior Vern. Vern reassured the group, noting that since he could still hear their voices, it meant they were all holding on. He encouraged them to endure a little longer, and his words lifted their spirits, prompting everyone to agree and press forward. As Vern observed his companions, he reflected on the state of the party. He realized that everyone had grown increasingly restless. The subjugation team had started with a total of 70 members, but after countless battles within the dungeon, only 43 remained alive. The rest had fallen, succumbing to the relentless onslaught of monsters. Thinking about their losses, Vern felt a surge of anger and frustration. He clenched his fists, determined to shift his perspective. Instead of focusing on the 31 who had been lost, he chose to see the strength and resilience of the 43 who had survived. Despite everyone's best efforts to fight valiantly, they had been unable to save all their comrades, and the weight of those losses weighed heavily on his heart. Vern tried to convince himself that this was exactly what they had prepared for. He reminded himself that everyone knew the risks and had accepted the inevitable losses. After all, this dungeon was one of the 7 great evil dungeons, known as the Primordial Core. Losing comrades was an unfortunate but expected reality in such a perilous place. As Vern wrestled with his thoughts, one of the adventurers called out to him, urging him to look ahead. Following their gaze, Vern's eyes fell upon a massive door looming before them. In that moment, he realized they had finally reached the Primordial Core, the end of the dungeon. It was the culmination of their journey, the final destination of their expedition, and the ultimate test of all their sacrifices and efforts. Vern's thoughts turned to what lay beyond the colossal door. He imagined treasures beyond their wildest dreams, unimaginable riches waiting to be claimed. More than that, he knew it was the resting place of the greatest creation, the 36th masterpiece that had brought humanity into existence. It was also the domain of the dungeon's master, the being they had come to face. As they stepped into the room, the dungeon began to shake and vibrate violently. Reacting swiftly, Vern shouted commands to his team, instructing everyone to form a proper line. He ordered the shields and swordsmen to take the front positions, ready to face whatever threat awaited them, while the mages were tasked with illuminating the area to improve visibility during their battle against the dungeon's master. Moments later, the tremors abruptly ceased. Leaving the group in a state of confusion, unsure of what was happening, the mages suggested spreading light around the area to better understand their surroundings. They warned everyone to remain vigilant and not to lower their guard. As the room brightened, Vern suddenly froze in awe. His breath caught as he took in the sight before him. Standing there in all its terrifying glory was the dungeon's master, the very creature they had come to confront. Realizing the dire situation they were in, Vern commanded the remaining members of his team to retreat immediately, knowing they stood no chance against the monstrous foe before them. However, his efforts were in vain, and the group was completely annihilated. Elsewhere, the dungeon boss, known as Mr. Devourer, recounted the events to one of his subordinates, Pedrick. He explained how the adventurers had entered his domain, only to meet their demise at his hands. Listening to the story, Pedrick asked if it was true that Devourer had been resting when the humans invaded and that he had overcome his exhaustion to defeat them. Devourer confirmed with pride that this was indeed the case. With an air of satisfaction, Devourer boasted to Pedrick about his triumph. He declared that he had faced not one but 2 adversaries, the invading humans and his own fatigue, and he had emerged victorious against both. As Devourer finished speaking, He noticed the worried expression on Pedrick's face and asked why he looked so angry and unsettled, even though all the humans who had attempted to conquer the dungeon had been defeated. Devourer tried to reassure Pedrick, urging him to calm down, but Pedrick's frustration only grew. Pedrick responded with sharp words, stating that there was no way he could remain calm after hearing how his boss had acted when enemies invaded the dungeon. Raising his voice, Pedrick reminded Devourer that, as the dungeon boss, he had a responsibility to remain vigilant. Sleeping while humans fought their way through the dungeon's monsters to reach him was unacceptable. Pedrick went on to express his disbelief at Devourer's behavior, pointing out that yawning in front of the invaders upon their arrival at the lair was utterly nonsensical. He concluded by chastising Devourer, declaring that the real problem was not the humans or the fatigue, but Devourer's own lack of seriousness and flawed mentality. Pedrick, fuming with anger, turned to another companion, Renee, and asked for her opinion on the situation. Renee hesitated before admitting she wasn't sure what to think. However, she added that the fact Devourer had overcome the humans with nothing more than a yawn left her in awe, once again, of his dignity. She expressed her excitement and happiness, marveling at how her boss had handled the invaders. Pedrick, visibly annoyed by Renee's unwavering support for Devourer, sighed in frustration, while Devourer himself appeared perplexed by the conflicting reactions unfolding before him. Feeling overwhelmed, Pedrick sank into his chair, muttering to himself that he should probably give up and resigning to the idea that the dungeon was doomed. Hearing this, Devourer tried to lift Pedrick's spirits, urging him not to dwell on the matter so much. He added with a wry comment that if Pedrick continued overthinking the situation, it would only lead to his bones rotting away. The 7 dungeons that humans had tentatively deemed impossible to raid were collectively known as the 7 Great Evil Dungeons, with Devourer serving as the boss of one of them, the Primordial Core. In most cases, dungeon raids ended in victory for the humans, who could launch their attacks at any time, forcing the monsters to remain perpetually on guard. This imbalance placed the dungeon's defenders at a disadvantage, and the repeated battles gradually weakened most dungeons at an alarming rate. However, amidst the countless dungeons successfully raided and repurposed over time, the existence of a few exceptional dungeons that humans could not conquer was almost inevitable. These were the Great Evil Dungeons, or more precisely, the 7 Great Evil Dungeons which mankind universally agreed were beyond conquest. Among these infamous strongholds, the Primordial Core stood out as the most fearsome. Deep within this realm of chaos and danger, countless monstrous creatures defended the dungeon, while the gatekeeper of the 3 crossroads waited, guarding its most critical threshold. The homunculus guarding the red crossroad to the left was known as Blade Maid Renee, while the skeleton defending the blue crossroad at the center bore the name Death Knight Pedrick. As for the filth-tainted path to the right, little information was available. Overseeing this chaotic fortress was the primordial monster from the earliest chapter of the Empire's mythology, a being named Devourer. Renee closed the book she had been reading and informed Devourer that this was what was written within its pages. She then remarked that, as he had previously mentioned, the book's spread among humans had indeed led to an increase in intrusions. Devourer responded calmly, explaining that managing a dungeon required a certain finesse. He added that wrapping it in a touch of mysticism kept humans intrigued and oblivious to its deeper truths. Devourer explained to Renee that leaking selective information like this was a strategy. By feeding humans just enough details, they would mistakenly believe they understood everything about the dungeon. When humans came across books like these, half filled with fantasy and embellishments, they would flock to them like moths to a flame. However, Devourer admitted that even with this tactic, he had not anticipated humans coming to his dungeon in such overwhelming numbers. He then turned to Renee, asking if there had indeed been 74 humans in the group that had just invaded, as he couldn't quite recall the exact number. Around them, the lifeless bodies of the adventurers lay scattered across the floor, all of them having met their end at Devourer's hands. Renee agreed with Devourer, acknowledging that his strategy was sound. However, she pointed out that most of the gear worn by the humans had melted during their battle with Mr. 116's black tentacles, rendering the equipment useless. She also mentioned that the few items that remained intact were quite expensive. Renee expressed her confidence that had she been in charge of dealing with the humans, she would have been able to handle them without damaging the gear. Noticing the sadness on Renee's face, Devourer, sensing her disappointment over not being able to help him acquire the gear, shifted back into his human form. He placed a hand gently on her head and reassured her that he was certain she would have been able to collect all of the equipment if she had been the one to face the humans. Devourer urged her not to be upset about the outcome, offering comfort in his usual calm manner. After being comforted by Devourer, Renee smiled happily. But in the corner, Pedrick was still fuming with anger. Unable to contain his frustration, he asked Devourer if he was sure they had gathered for a meeting, as it seemed to Pedrick that they were all simply there to have fun. He then turned to Renee and Devourer, questioning why they were the only ones appearing so content with the situation. Pedrick's expression shifted suddenly, brightening as he continued with a sarcastic tone. He remarked that the atmosphere there felt so sweet that just by breathing the air, he thought he might develop cavities. However, he added that he didn't think it would only rot his teeth. His head might just start to rot as well. Pedrick then turned to Devourer, telling him that if he was going to polymorph, he might as well do it properly. He added that he had just caught a glimpse of Devourer patting Renee's head, while noticing that Devourer had 6 fingers instead of 5. Devourer checked his hands and confirmed that Pedrick was right. There were indeed 6 fingers. Pedrick then remarked that it was still better than the last time Devourer had polymorphed, when he had more than 40 teeth. Pedrick recalled with a shiver how Devourer had proudly smiled, declaring that his transformation had gone perfectly, a sight that had sent chills down Pedrick's spine. Renee, clearly annoyed, told Pedrick that his jaw was making too much noise. Pedrick, upon hearing this, thought to himself that if Renee was so disgusted by it, she might as well quit being the dungeon gatekeeper. Renee, shifting the conversation, informed everyone that she would get straight to the point. She explained that humans had finally begun invading the right crossroad. The problem, however, was that 116 black tentacles, who had been guarding the right crossroad, had suffered a major injury and his condition seemed critical. Devourer, however, reassured Renee not to worry too much, as the regenerative abilities of the tentacles were beyond her imagination. He suggested that they wait and see how things progressed, and if it didn't work out, they would simply hire a new gatekeeper. With a bright smile, Pedrick then chimed in, suggesting that if Devourer were to hire a new gatekeeper, he should hire 2 instead of just 1. Pedrick added that this way, Devourer could finally stop being the gatekeeper himself. Upon hearing Pedrick's comment, Devourer asked what he was talking about and reminded him that Pedrick's contract was for life. After making this point, Devourer shifted the conversation and told them that the humans were only targeting his right crossroad. Pedrick then added that the humans might already be organizing a new raid force. Renee pointed out that humans these days frequently used communication magic, like telepathy, so the news about the crack in the rightward filth crossroad might have already spread among them. In response, Devourer raised his voice, telling them that if that was the case, they would need to adjust their plans accordingly. He then told Renee and Pedrick to listen carefully as he was about to explain their next course of action. Devourer concluded by announcing that they were going to switch positions. Devourer then told Renee that since she had been guiding the red path on the left, she would now be responsible for the filth crossroad on the right. He explained that the raid force would likely swarm there, thinking the area would be unguarded, and all Renee needed to do was stop the humans who would come to her path. Motivated and confident, Renee assured Devourer that she could stop any number of intruders that would come her way. Devourer then turned his attention to Pedrick and told him that he would now need to take care of the red crossroad on the left, which Renee had been protecting. Pedrick, surprised, asked why it had to be him. Devourer explained that once the humans realized Renee was on the filth crossroad, they would head for the red crossroad, expecting to find her there. Instead, it would be Pedrick who would be guarding it, and he would be the one to stop anyone who came in that direction. After explaining the plan to Pedrick and Renee, Devourer told them that this way they would be able to stop 2 invasions. However, Pedrick interrupted and asked what would happen if the humans decided to head for the blue crossroad in the center. Devourer, caught off guard and unsure of how to respond, admitted that he didn't have an answer for that. He then told them that if the humans chose the blue crossroad, there was nothing they could do about it, and that the humans would simply have to enjoy a date with Devourer himself. Pedrick, hearing this, questioned Devourer's plan, stating that it seemed like a messy and inadequate strategy. However, Renee, her eyes sparkling with excitement, praised Devourer's suggestion, calling it a brilliant idea. Pedrick, though dissatisfied, reluctantly agreed to go along with the plan. Renee then spoke, telling the others that now that the most urgent matters were mostly handled, the only remaining issue was deciding what to do with the sword. Upon hearing this, Devourer asked Renee what she meant by sword. Pedrick stood up and clarified, telling Devourer that Renee was referring to the sword used by the leader of the raid force. He added that the humans who came to the dungeon this time must have been quite powerful, considering they were carrying such weapons. Devourer, curious, asked them to explain what kind of sword they were talking about. Pedrick, confident that Devourer had heard of it, took out the sword and revealed it to Devourer, explaining that it was the 36th masterpiece, a very famous weapon among humans. Pedrick then sheathed the sword and told Devourer that although the sword wasn't exactly a weapon, its number was 14, and its name was Tannabella. Upon hearing the name, Devourer finally remembered and said that it wasn't a particularly important sword. He added that he bet there were a few of them crammed in some corner of the storage. Devourer then mentioned that one of the blades Renee had right now was also one of the 36 masterpieces. Pedrick, impressed by the quality of the items humans carried, asked Devourer what they should do with the sword. He pointed out that if they gave it to one of the monsters stationed at the entrance, humans would just snatch it back, and if it fell into their hands again, it would cause problems for all 3 of them. With that, Pedrick suggested that Devourer should take the sword. Devourer then asked Pedrick if he would be able to use the sword, pointing out that Pedrick also wielded swords. Pedrick, momentarily confused by Devourer's question, was suddenly filled with happiness. He replied that he had no choice since it was the boss's orders, so the sword now belonged to him. Afterward, Devourer rested his head on the table and reminded Pedrick that now that the sword was his, Pedrick should tear up the resignation letter he had hidden in his ribs. Renee then shifted the conversation, asking what they should do about the remaining income distribution. Pedrick, now satisfied with the sword as his payment, told Devourer that this was enough for him. Devourer, in turn, told Renee that they should handle it as they always had. He suggested using as much as they could on their end and using what remained as bait to lure the next group of intruders in. Renee, excited, told Devourer that she would handle the detailed distribution again, to which Devourer agreed. However, Pedrick was unsure if the situation could be entirely entrusted to Renee. Renee then suggested to the others that they didn't really have much use for the magic tools, and asked Devourer if they should remove the mana stones and sell them to make a significant amount of money. Devourer, upon hearing this, thought it was a great idea. He then mentioned that he might visit the human village. Both Renee and Pedrick were shocked by this suggestion. Devourer, seeing their reaction, asked why they were so surprised. Pedrick, with a worried expression, advised Devourer that it would be much better if Renee went to the village instead of him. Renee quickly agreed with Pedrick's suggestion. Devourer, growing annoyed, asked Pedrick why he had said that. Pedrick explained that Devourer was bad at transforming into a human, which could cause a lot of trouble. Although Devourer was irritated by Pedrick's suggestion, he reluctantly agreed with his plan. He then told Renee that she could go and should buy lots of delicious food for him. A short while later, Renee was standing outside the dungeon, gazing at the sky. She noted to herself that the weather was quite nice that day. With a smile, she spoke to Devourer, telling him that she would be back shortly before heading off to the village. Once in the village, Renee entered a shop where she was supposed to sell the items. The shop owner, addressing her as a kid, informed her that, unfortunately, he couldn't buy the items from her. Renee, hearing this from the shop owner, grew furious and asked him why he couldn't buy the mana stones from her. The shop owner then reached for one of the mana stones he had and showed it to her. He explained that the mana stone he was holding was a B-rank mana stone, adding that commoners needed to work for at least 10 years to afford one. He further explained that the mana stones Renee had brought were all larger than the one he showed her, and as a result, they could only be used by mages from the royal palace or high-ranking members of the Mage's Tower. He suggested that perhaps a jeweler in the capital who had an agreement with the royal family or the Mage's Tower wing might be able to handle the mana stones she had brought. Renee, upon hearing that she would need to go to either the capital or the Mage Tower, thought to herself that the capital was too far, leaving the Mage Tower as her only option. She didn't want to go to the Mage Tower, but she decided that if it was for Devourer, she was willing to make the trip. With that, she turned toward the door and bid farewell to the shop owner. The shop owner, as she was leaving, noticed that there was still a piece of mana stone left on the table. He called out to her, telling her that she had forgotten it. Renee, without turning back, told him that the mana stone was a tip for the information he had provided. The shop owner, watching her leave, thought to himself that Renee was a strange kid. Moments later, Renee arrived at the Mage Tower's wing, where one of the mages greeted her and asked if she had come to sell mana stones. The mage added that if that was the case, it would be better for her to meet with the guild master. Renee agreed with his suggestion, and the mage told her that he would guide her to the office, asking her to follow him. As they walked, Renee observed the structure of the tower, noting that the leader of the Mage Tower was located at the top, and she realized that the Mage Tower was similar to a dungeon in design. At that moment, the mage directed her to come this way, and as she entered, a woman sitting in her chair, surrounded by several mages, greeted Renee. The woman then thanked Renee for traveling such a long distance and introduced herself as Graumitz Amer, the leader of the Wings Tower Guild. Afterward, she asked Renee who she was, but Renee, noticing the significant amount of mana the woman possessed, calmly replied that her name was Renee. Amir then explained that she had heard rumors about a young child arriving, and though she had initially planned to ignore her, the guards had informed her that Renee had a considerable amount of mana stones to sell. Amir had thus decided to meet with Renee. She also mentioned that, being aware of the fame of the Wings Mage Tower, she trusted that Renee had brought high-quality mana stones that matched the tower's standards. Upon hearing this, Renee took all the mana stones from her bag and told Amir to confirm their quality for herself. Amir was taken aback when she saw all the mana stones, as they were all of A-rank quality. To her surprise, some of the mana stones were top grade, nearing the highest tier within the A-rank category. Amir thought to herself that such powerful mana stones were not items a child should possess, and she began to wonder who this young girl in front of her truly was. She then asked Renee who she was and where she had obtained all of these mana stones. As she studied Renee more closely, Amir noticed her silver hair, which reminded her that one of the Empire's 8 noble families was known for possessing silver hair. Amir wondered if this could be the daughter of that family, perhaps having run away and secretly gathered all these mana stones. Amir gave a faint smile and thought to herself that there was no other way such a young child could possess so many mana stones. She concluded that Renee must be unaware of the world's complexities and decided to take advantage of the situation. Amir then spoke up, apologizing for her earlier rudeness. She explained that she never imagined the products Renee had brought would be of such high quality. She added that the Wings Magic Tower would be eager to buy all of the mana stones from Renee. Amir offered to pay 50 ounces of gold coins per stone, with 80 ounces for those in particularly good condition. Renee, hearing this offer, remembered what the previous shop owner had told her, that it would take a commoner 10 years of hard work to afford even one of these mana stones. Renee thought to herself that the average human earned about 10 ounces of gold coins after working for 1 year. In 10 years, that would amount to 100 ounces. With a serious expression, she addressed Amir, warning her that if she was joking, Amir would regret it. Amir, taken aback by Renee's awareness of the mana stone's value, felt a slight panic. She quickly responded, explaining that the guild didn't have enough money to buy all the mana stones Renee had brought, and they could not purchase them all. Renee, her face filled with anger, retorted that if Amer couldn't afford all of them, she should at least buy as many as she could. Amer, troubled by Renee's response, then presented 2,000 ounces of gold, explaining that this was all the money the guild had available. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.